Okay, so magandang umaga, no? So good morning, everyone, and I hope you can hear me well. So welcome to the parallel session B on the ancestral domain dispute resolution. So let me introduce myself very briefly. I'm BJ Angeles-Mendoza. I am also a member of MedNet. I will be your moderator for this session. So napaka-swerte natin, no? We're very privileged to have with us Mr. Timothy Salomon from the National Land Coalition Philippines. So pabayaan niyo kung magsalita ng kaunti, merong maikling bio si Sir Tim, no? I'll say a few words about him, no? So Timothy is a community psychologist by training, no? Who applies healing and conflict resolution techniques to community settings for land rights and environmental justice. He is a former public servant with the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, or OPAP, who worked for 5 years, no, on peace building in armed conflict-affected areas. He's also a former national coordinator of the Philippine Indigenous Community Conserved Areas, or ICA Consortium. He currently serves as the facilitator of the National Land Coalition in the Philippines. But what I found quite interesting in his bio is that Timothy doubles in observational stand-up comedy in his free time. So I did a small research. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng observational stand-up comedy? Ibig sabihin nun, parang siyang parang form of humor, no, based on the commonplace aspects of everyday life. Okay, so ewan ko kung kanyang presentation ay merong kurot ng humor na kailangan din natin sa ating pang-araw-araw na buhay. Ano? So, okay, so now let's give the virtual floor to Mr. Timothy Salomon.
Yan, magandang umaga po sa lahat. Maraming salamat po sa very generous introduction, Miss BJ. Let's try to keep this light. Sabi ko nga, I try to be funny in my presentations. Pero as I understand, hindi ganun ka-funny yung discussion of conflict. Pero we try to make light yung mga solutions that we bring up to it. Because usually the solutions are usually easier than we thought. So, ayan, allow me to share my konting disclaimer lang din po. I originally prepared several cases, pero I was advised to present only one. The case that I was asked to present was not solely about mediation, but more about leveling the field to enable indigenous peoples to participate in mediation contexts that are more fair, because as we understand, usually the policy context, the cultural context is already unfair to begin with for indigenous people. So most of the interventions that I will share here is actually just allowing indigenous peoples to reach the negotiating table, and they themselves were the ones who conducted the mediation themselves or the negotiation. Mediation was conducted mostly by government officials, and which we also engage in order to inform them of the rights of indigenous peoples in relation to their respective mandates. So in terms of the mediation, hindi po ako mismo yung gumawa, but we engaged both parties, the indigenous peoples. We strengthened their capacities, and we informed the government of their duty to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, so as to have a negotiation process that was more fair than the status quo. So ayan po. Ito po, so allow me to begin my presentation. I'm the National Platform Facilitator ng National Land Coalition in the Philippines. So the National Land Coalition of the Philippines is composed of 9 organizations, so I won't go into each of them. But my presentation will delve on my experience when I was still the national coordinator of the Philippine ICCA Consortium. Nevertheless, the same area is still a service area where I have transitioned my role to. So I have consent to make this presentation. So yeah, let me begin with the general context. I know most of you are already familiar and might more than me about this reality. The Philippine land area is about 30 million hectares, with a ridge to reef landscape from upland, lowland, and coastal areas. So kalahati ay alienable and disposable lands or lands that could be distributed to be private property. And half is public domain or considered within the ownership of the state. So yon, among which 10 million are agricultural lands covered, some of which are covered under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, and which shares a lot of overlap with the indigenous people's rights in terms of traditional territories of indigenous people. So my presentation will delve actually on these several overlaps. Originally, I wanted to present something with overlap with the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, but I decided on focusing on an overlap with the Protected Area System, or the NIPAS, National Integrated Protected Area System. So yan, allow me to set the stage for where the conflict that I will share took place. So ito po ang Tinoyan Falls. So meron na hubang nakapunta dito? It is in Bislig City, Surigao del Sur. So kung meron na po, raise your hands. Wala pa. Okay. Sige po. So, may nag-heart. Ibig sabihin nakapunta na po kayo dyan, Miss Ray. Ayan. Ayan. Sige po. This falls is actually the namesake of a living datu, si Hawudon Tinoyan. So his back is here, and nandun yung kanyang traditional jersey. That's what they call it. They call the attire in layman's terms, traditional jersey. So Hawudon Tinoyan, and this falls, it is a 4-story falls that is named after the living datu. And this should lay the stage already that the indigenous peoples lay a native claim over the said falls and practice traditional management and governance over the water and forest resources that allow these waterfalls to be sustained throughout generations. So here is a map of the overlap that I will present to you. So we call it a saga of overlaps because as you can see, the map with the red boundaries, it is called the Pangasananan. It is the traditional name of the Indigenous Community Conserved Area, or the ICCA, of the Manobo indigenous communities who practice governance over the area. The violet boundary is the Tinoyan Waterfalls Protected Landscape. So the Pangasananan is a traditional category of conservation of the community, and they have registered this with the United Nations Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center for ICCAs. So registered na ito noong 2016 pa lang. Okay? So itong mismong ICCA na to actually predates the Tinoyan Waterfalls Protected Landscape, because the Waterfalls Protected Landscape was legislated and proclaimed with the expanded National Integrated Protected Area System of 2018. So dito pa lang, if we observe the case, there is precedence of the ICCA over the protected area in legal terms. Although we do not even need the legal terms, because the IPRA has said that indigenous people's resource rights and land rights are recognized as far back as memory reaches, citing the doctrine of the native title. So the stakeholders in the case, allow me to enumerate, is the Manobo Tribal Council of Sotek, or the Matricoso, the city government of Bislig City, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, particularly the Regional Office of Caraga and the Biodiversity Management Bureau at the national level. Na-involved din dito ang Bislig City Police Station. We also tap the United Nations Development Program, particularly on climate change team, to allow us to have an audience with the BMB in order to make the stage a little bit fairer for the indigenous peoples. The Protected Area Management Board of the Tinoy-an Waterfalls Protected Landscape, which was then newly established, and the Philippine ICCA Consortium, which was then I was acting as a national coordinator. So during this time, I set the stage in 2019 when the new administration of the city mayor was taking place. The previous mayor, the one exercising governance from 2016 to 2019, has an existing memorandum of agreement with the Matricoso, which has several provisions, but the most notable of which is the recognition of the traditional governance. And in the traditional governance, there are several benefits shared with the community. So merong 10 employees who are required to be employed by the LGU, practicing important roles in the management of the tourism operations, such as yung pagbabantay ng mismong lugar, because nga territory nila, so it is still best, practical, and cost efficient that the locals, the Manobo peoples, are the ones guarding the area, as well as some livelihood positions like selling and managing the community resort. So meron din silang profit share of 10% from incomes generated from collections from the tourism area, as well as dun sa mga businesses who pay taxes from the tourism operations. So yun, this MOA was not renewed, and the mayor refused to sign the reinstatement of the MOA. So as a result, the IPs employed in the Tinoy Falls were terminated, and migrants from other barangays were hired as placement. So you can imagine the pain that this brought, because the waterfalls is actually very near the residential area of the community. And for the former employees to see new migrants taking over the jobs that they used to have in the previous administration. Also, the 10% profit share, hindi ito binibigay ng perang lump sum dun sa Matricoso. Merong kakabit yan na community development plan na ini-implement. So, yung mga pinagkagastusan yan are actually community organizing activities, mga training for forest guards, training for livelihood, and yung pag-management community resort. So nung nawala tong 10% profit share, nawala yung base ng economic activity ng community. So hindi nagkaroon ng valid pre-farm informed consent at any point in the administration. Pero the tourism operations proceeded for about 6 months when the new mayor took over. Nag-issue pa sila ng notice of demolition dun sa community-owned infrastructures na recognized nung incumbent mayor. So tinawag na illegal structures yung community resort that the community was operating. So ito yung community leaders. What they did was they didn't get a picture, pero they established a blockade to the tourism operation site and stop operations for about 2 weeks, hurting the economy of the city. Kasi ito yung main draw for tourism dun sa lugar. And also hurting the local community themselves, the indigenous peoples, because many households were depending on income from the tourists naman. So this was the statement to prove that although the local government has legal power, has the power to not recognize indigenous peoples, the indigenous peoples had the power to claim the sheer operation of the whole tourism activity. So tumigil siya ng 2 weeks, nasaktan talaga yung city government. Ang naging problema, initially this wasn't interpreted well. The local government pursued several retaliatory measures to criminalize the resource rights of the indigenous peoples. Please remember that the community, aside from the ICCA, the Community Conserved Area declared with the UNEP WCMC, they also have a certificate of ancestral domain that has already been awarded. Nevertheless, the local government, they issued warrants of arrest against community members for illegal kaingin in the area. There is a particular gray area in our law that that provides criminalization of rights. For example, uh, dito sa case na to, nagkaingin talaga yung community, pero itong kaingin na ito was written in the community and in the ancestral domain development plan of the community. So, according to IPRA, hindi dapat nakikriminalize yung kaingin na yon because it is within their traditional resource rights, yung tinatawag na Sustainable Traditional Resource Rights or STRR. But nevertheless, may conflict siya sa resource laws naman with the DNR kasi sa DNR, basta kaingin na walang permit, bawal yon. So yon, may gray area. And this provided for the justification for the arrests of community leaders who practice STRR, yung kaingin. So lumapit yung mga matrikoso leaders sa public attorney's office and ang advice pa nga na papaw is magtago na lang sila. Hindi sila binigyan ng any advice on how to pursue litigation or to pursue strategies to have the cases drop kasi meron namang IPRA that gives them justification for their resource rights. Tinabi na magtago na lang, possibly because hindi alam nung PAW or complicit siya dun sa criminalization ng mismong kaingin activities ng community. While this was taking place, a news report was released by local news citing that there were 2 eagles found in the Tunoy unprotected landscape. Allow me to point you to the injustice in the media coverage here. It was presented as if it was the protected area who found the Philippine eagles, when in fact the sheer take of this picture was the phone of this particular datu who was caught. Tapos, dun sa media coverage, makikita dun sa comment section nung mismong makikita dun sa comment section nung Facebook page nung news company ay sinasabi na yung mga manobo mismo, sila yung threat dun sa Philippine Eagle, na baka gawin daw nilang inasal yung Philippine Eagle. At ang dami daw, tapos putol daw ng putol yung mga puno, when in fact, yung forest guards nung lugar ay yung mga manobo. In fact, mali pa nga yung report nila na 2 agile. Kasi kumalat lang tong picture, tapos pinick up na agad ng media. Tapos nag-tip dun sa DNR to validate, ganyan. So kumbaga, hindi pa nga pinaalam yung paggamit ng picture na to. Tapos, mali pa yung report. Kasi sa totoo lang, there are 3 eagles in the area. May 2 adult, it's a couple, and merong juvenile eagle na bata lang na nasa nest. So, bukod sa walang paalam yung report, mali pa yung coverage, kulang ng data. So, ayan. Several more instances of criminalization of resource rights. A community leader was asked to sign an affidavit na sinasabi na nagko-contain ng waiver na dapat umalis na siya dun sa farmland niya kasi yung farm niya ay within the protected area. So it is an insult to their traditional land rights kasi nga bukod sa may CADT, native title naman nila yung lugar. An LGU task force was also created to report and arrest illegal loggers. Tapos ang modus operandi nila is to have non-IP community members cut down trees and to accuse the action of cutting down trees to be directed to alleged indigenous community members. So yun, it was a systemic attempt to criminalize and to delegitimize the governance of the matrikoso so as to justify the non-recognition of their governance over the tourism area. So yun, so given that this is a highly sensitive situation, we decided to already intervene yung Philippine ICC Consortium. So here is our Mindanao coordinator. I was the one who was taking this picture. So wala ako dito. So yan. ito yung community level interventions namin. We started with building the capacities of the matrikoso in order to level the playing field, kasi nga ang may political power at saka may resources ay yung city government. We provided them training on their rights, particularly the rights of the accused, kasi meron ngang 5 datus who were accused of illegal logging. We also provided them training on communications planning in social media because there was widespread disinformation on their role in the governance of the area. And we provided them also training on effective participation in the Protected Area Management Board, or the PRAMB. We referred them to ULAN, Upholding Life in Nature, who was a legal organization who provided advice and represented them in litigation. Later discuss ko to yung Supreme Court decision, pero meron kasing na-release na Supreme Court decision that helps the case of the criminalization of resource rights of indigenous people. So nagbigay din kami ng assistance to bail. And at the national level, we referred to the case to the Biodiversity Management Bureau with the facilitation of the UNDP. Kasi at this point, we were observing a national trend of criminalization of resource rights. So hindi lang sa Bislig ito, sa Surigao del Sur, we also, because our membership was national, we also were gathering cases from Benguet, Oriental Mindoro, Zamboanga del Norte, and North Cotabato. So we needed to raise it at national level because it seemed systemic sa buong DNR bureaucracy. So yun, what the BMB did was they referred us to each of the regional directors or the PAMBs. So medyo tedious pa nga eh. Sabi nga namin, hindi ba pwede mag-issue na lang kayo ng polisiya yun sa taas sa BMB? Hindi. Iisa-isahin namin. So sige. It was an opportunity, so we still, despite it being very tedious and difficult. So we directly negotiated with the regional director of Caraga. And yun, in the PAMB, we presented the ICCE map. And even the local government was dumbfounded, surprised that the ICCE was registered with the UN. So with this information, the positions of the stakeholders sort of softened because they realized that Batricoso had legitimate claims over the area. So at the policy level interventions, we issued the policy paper critiquing the INAIPAS, the National Integrated Protected Area System, because the IRR is making policies or making policy statements that goes beyond the original intent of the law. Because in the IRR, it said that the DNR will only recognize traditional territories or ancestral domains only if they have CADTs or CALCs. When in the original law, it was clearly stated that the recognition redounds even to the native title. So ibig sabihin, hindi mo kailangan ng titulo para ma-recognize ka. The sheer fact that there is a notorious occupation or notorious presence of indigenous peoples, their rights must be recognized and respected. So we also conducted a public forum on the Supreme Court Decision 22469. It is the Sama Masanglay decision na nagsasabi na ang decision ay if there are traditional resource rights being practiced that might conflict with resource laws of the Philippines, these are recognized as long as they are considered sustainable and traditional. So yung mga resource rights such as kaingin and other practices like hunting of animals, they are recognized because they are part of the cultural heritage of indigenous peoples, which is guaranteed by the IPRA. Essentially, ang ginawa ng Supreme Court decision, it reaffirmed IPRA above the strict resource laws of the natural resource sector in the context of ancestral domains. So we made the public forum in partnership with the Commission on Human Rights and several NGOs that we work with. So yun, present yung mga agencies that are relevant, and there was consensus on respecting the resource rights of indigenous peoples, owing to the fact actually that it is their governance that is maintaining 75% of the key biodiversity areas in the country. So yun, yung results, the cases filed were dropped by the DNR Caraga. Bail was returned and converted to livelihood assistance to assess arrested datus. Tapos naging input pa yung SEV kasi ang dami talaga ng bail eh. So some of the bail was reinvested into the reforestation plan of the community. Yung Matricoso and the Philippine ICCA was recognized as permanent members of the PAMB. And the PAMB itself has committed to integrate the development plan of the Matricoso in the protected area management plan. Still to be developed kasi nga bagong formation siya. The DNR Caraga, as an act of restoration, provided funds for nursery establishment. And this was used as a counterpart mechanism for a donation of the public sector partner, the Lush Organics. Nag-support ng more restoration efforts ng denuded areas sa community and the development of a community ecotourism plan para maging ma-restore din yung relationship with the LGU dun sa control over the ecotourism site. So yun, because we documented 4 similar cases, nagkaroon din na national trend na na-drop yung cases na na-observe namin. So in all 4 of the cases that we documented, natanggal yung na-drop yung case ng criminalization of the resource rights. So because of this triumph, we shared this with Vox International and it was published. So nandito po yung headline ng mismong news article. So I'll share you the link. So lessons learned, capacity development of ITs is key kasi nga hindi tayo locals doon. So the key is to strengthen the capacities of the locals who experience the damage that is brought by criminalization. In mediation terms, what is important is to level the playing field. So we need to strengthen the one party who is greatly disadvantaged in order to enable them to participate in a fair negotiation process. So we also directly engaged the DNR and the several offices of it. And we had so many meetings, like about, I think, 14 meetings kami with DNR. And it was, bukod sa tedious siya, it was rewarding because we eventually got what we needed because we informed the DNR of their duty to recognize indigenous people's rights. So yon, for cases of criminalization, in particular for lawyers, it is good to utilize yung Supreme Court decision ng Sama Masanglay because we demonstrated it was dropped in 5 cases already where we operate. So yun, so some final words. The same mayor was re-elected. Hindi pa nagkakaroon ng negotiation dun sa mismong tourism operation, but due to the precedent that he experienced in the previous administration with the Matricoso, winning many of the recognition of the DNR, at least there is brighter spaces to enable partnership with the LGU. So yon, ito po yung article with the Matricoso. Tapos we also have a database of ICCAs. May 16 the ICCAs, one of which is the Matricoso. Tapos we also invite you to the upcoming launch of our biodiversity camp. So yon, we partnered with the Eco Exploration. So we invite you to come to the Tinoyan Waterfalls, the site of our triumph over criminalization of resource rights. Maraming salamat.
Okay, maraming salamat, Timothy. Bigyan natin ng masigabong virtual clap si Sir Timothy. Alright, okay. So, siguro bago ko lang buksan, at may mga tanong tayo, kung meron tayong mga gusto i-comment doon sa na-share ni Timothy. Balikan ko lang ng maikli. Hopefully, I have captured yung presentation. So, bali, kumbaga, I have seen the initial presentation slide. So, medyo maganda rin sana mag-discuss yung mga iba, pero it's good that you focus on this one. So, na-share niya sa atin yung case nila doon sa Tinoyan, Falls, at yung kumbaga yung parang ang context ng overlap between the ancestral domain of the indigenous peoples in the area at saka yung ating nipas ng area. So, and nabanggit ni Timothy yung kanilang mga interventions both at the community level and also at the policy level. at naibalik na rin sa atin ano yung naging resulta nung efforts, nung intervention nila. Maraming mga, kumbaga, mga success na points, no? In terms of the cases that were initially filed, tapos ano yung mga nangyari dun sa, in terms of yung kanilang relasyon doon sa PAMBI, at of course, na ibanggit niya sa ano yung mga natutunan nila, ano yung mga kailangang matandaan natin, especially when we are when communities and CSOs are confronted with similar cases. No, kasi parang yung nangyari sa case nila, hindi lang ito naka-focus doon sa Pinoyan area, pero mukhang parang may sinasabi nga niya na parang may trend, mayroong parang replication ng similar cases sa iba pang mga lugar sa ating bansa. Okay, so hopefully, I gave justice to your presentation at siguro ibubuksan ko yung ating floor sa mga tanong kung may gustong I'm sure naging napaka-interesting no yung presentation ni Timothy at sa ating mga experiences and sa ating mga ginagawa. Alam ko na itong nasa room na ito ay nanggagaling sa iba pang mga kumbaga sektor, no? So, magandang marinig din ang inyong mga perspectives on the sharing of Timothy. May tanong ba tayo at or any other comments sa ating session presentation? Uy, huwag tayong mahiya. Sige lang po. Si Ray, may gusto ka bang sabihin? Pwede pong magtaas ng kamay. Pwede rin namang i-unmute nyo na yung inyong mga microphone. Ayan. Sige, si Tanya ng Saligan. Kung pwede, kung kakayanin, baka pwede magbukas ng video. Kung kakayanin.
Okay po, sige po.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Sir Timothy. I was just wondering, is the re-elected mayor now open to restoring relations with the community?
Yes, Miss Tanya, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, we tried to reach out, or the Matricoso tried to reach out already, pero medyo pa siya, nasa contending level pa siya. Nagre-resist pa siya, pero I think the statement of the cases being dropped at the DNR level, tapos the fact that we are both members in the PAMBI already, parang it sends a clear message na parang wala naman siyang choice. But pero yeah, hindi siya, pa siya, matigas pa.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Nag-follow-up question na lang po ako. Sige po. So, given na medyo resistant pa nga po yung mayor, what are the challenges that you foresee in the coming months, years, especially sa community, since I'm sure they will have to encounter, if not work with their local government?
Yes, ang na-foresee namin kasi baka i-attempt niya ulit yung criminalization na ginawa niya in the previous administration, yung LGU task force on illegal logging, etc. Pero kaya naging plan namin for intervention doon is to engage a known ecotourism leader in the Philippines, yung eco exploration, to promote yung tourism operations na IP-led. So bukod dun sa Tinoyan, we are also opening other sites. So meron kami binubuksan na caves and other waterfalls and a marsh and lake. So kung ang alam lang ng LGU is the falls, ang alam ng tribu ay itong 9 sites. So kung ikaw yung tourist, kung ikaw yung tourist, parang mas interesado yung 9 sites than just the falls. So ganoon namin tinatry isway yung LGU, kasi if he cooperates, he gets access to 8 more sites na pwedeng i-develop. So, parang tinatry namin i-frame yung conversation na sana hindi adversarial. Makipagtulungan ka na lang kasi kami mismo tutulong na magbukas pa ng iba pang site.
Okay. Parang gusto ko lang siguro, maraming mga tanong sa chat, pero siguro parang gusto kong sundan lang ng ikli yung sinabi ni Tanya. Kasi nga parang mukhang parang doon sa iyong kwento ay at isang point na na mukhang may challenge ay yung ating local government units, di ba? So gusto ko lang marinig mula sa iyo kasi ang efforts, di ba, ng inyong support ay ang aking impression from your sharing ay nakafocus sa ating mga katutubo, no, sa IP na partners natin. Meron bang equivalent na or parallel the efforts din na ginagawa ang inyong grupo na yun nga, sabi mo nga ay mai-reframe yung conversation na hindi adversarial ang maging attitude or ang maging stance ng mga LGU. So meron ba tayong ginagawa para i-address yun directly with the LGUs?
Actually, may plan naman po. In fact, nagkakaroon kami ng process of updating ng development plan ng community. Kasi finalized naman yung development plan. Pero we're updating it with the invitation to the mayor. So yun yung we're opening up the development planning process so that he can participate in the LGU itself. Pero hindi rin po, hindi pa responsive eh. We just sent a letter about last week. Tapos even idugtong ko na rin po doon sa tanong ng role na NCIP. We all, doon sa mismong development planning process, sila po yung magiging facilitator ng yung plan updating process. Medyo mahirap kunin yung cooperation nila. Kasi nung una, sabi nila wala silang pera to conduct the development planning process. Sabi namin, sige, meron kaming private companies investing in ecotourism. So, kami na kumbaga mag-sponsor ng plan. Tapos biglang ang issue ay wala daw silang authority to conduct the development planning. So parang, ewan ko, I don't want to interpret it badly, pero it seems that ayaw nilang gawin.
Ang NCIP?
Opo.
Okay. Sige. So mukhang parang may ilan pa tayong na-identify na mga kumbaga parang konting challenges, no? Not only dun sa LGU level na medyo may nakita tayo at nasa-sense na reluctance, at the same time sa level na NCIP na mukhang parang hindi siguro malinaw sa kanilang mandato o siguro meron din mga resource na constraints, no? So i-note ko lang yung dalawang yan kasi tignan natin kung later on, siguro pag nag-planning on yung strategy, tingnan natin kung paano makakatulong ang initiative na ito, itong conference na ito at yung mga nandito ngayon para makapag-suporta sa effort, no, ng inyong group, Timothy. Sige, so may ilang mga tanong dito galing, so nabanggit na yung kay Ariel, no, ano yung critical role ng NCIP, so nasagot na ito. Galing kay Abigail ng EDC, ayan, gusto niyang sumama doon sa biodiversity camp sa Pinoy-an. So thank you for sharing the insightful case study, Timothy. So meron lang siyang tanong sa inyong opinion, may risk ba that the SC ruling that decriminalized the actions of the IPs be exploited or abused? If yes, how can we prevent this from happening? Kasi di ba yung nabanggit mo kanina, although hindi ko pa nabasa yung Supreme Court ruling, pero yung tinignan ko kagabi, yung galing, yung parang may, yung, I think concurring opinion ni Justice Leonen, di ba? So parang sinasabi parang, parang may exemption, basta pero ang may parang qualifier siya na dapat sustainable at traditional yung practices ng IP para ma-consider mo na hindi siya kasali doon sa resource laws that criminalize, no, yung mga ganitong mga practices. So yun, so yung tanong niya ay how can we prevent yung exploitation or abuse, no, from that SC ruling?
Yes po. Actually yan, matinding tanong yan. Pero I think it's a matter of recognition na rin of the historical role of indigenous peoples in defending naturalism. Incidents na 7% ng key biodiversity areas nasa indigenous peoples territories. Which means, and is evidence enough, that they are the ones who effectively conserve biodiversity. And wala naman ibang kultura pa na embedded sa kanilang pagkatao yung relasyon sa kalikasan. I mean, the modern way of interacting with nature is that of exploitation, di ba? Like, gaining capital or gaining profit from natural resources. Kaya nga natural resources eh. 'Di ba? Ang tawag hindi nature or hindi tas environment externalized pa. Pero sa katulad nung sa Manobo, pangasananan ng tawag nila, a place where you get nourishment. So dun pa lang dun sa tawag nila, inherent na yung relasyon, yung malapot na relasyon sa kalikasan. So yung mechanisms to control actually is to allow indigenous peoples to tap into their traditional customary practices of conservation. It's not to prevent them of their practices, but to encourage them to practice it in accordance with their tradition. Kasi yung tradition nila has long been the reason for these resources to still be maintained up to this date. Kahit for example, dito sa Matricoso, site yan ng PICOP, yung Philippine Papers Industries Corporation. And sila yung nag-defend ng waterfalls against the PICOP historically na nag-ubos ng punong kahoy sa Caraga. So the falls is a symbol of that triumph. So I think hindi na dapat tanong actually kung pwede pang ma-abuse ng mga community yung kasi sila mismo pangarap nilang i-conserve yung natural resources until the next generation. In fact, ang problema pa nga ay yung mga hindi indigenous peoples ginagamit yung indigenous peoples rights para kumuha ng resources. So sasabihin nila, Manobo ako, pwede ako magputol, pero hindi naman talaga siya Manobo. Mas doon pa ako takot. Kesa doon sa mismong tribo yung i-regulate natin. Yun po.
Okay, so parang may mga data, parang data issues na may ilang mga aksyon o ilang mga sasabihin natin ng mga abusive conduct na na-attribute sa mga katutubo when in fact hindi ito nanggagaling sa kanila. Pero siguro gawin natin lively itong ating conversation. So hindi lang tayo kumbaga parang naka-spotlight kay Timothy. Kung okay lang, babalikan ko lang si Abigail. Abigail, curious din ako, siguro kung doon sa iyong naging question. No? So ano ba yung pinanggagalingan ng tanong na baka posible itong ma-abuse o ma-exploit at paano ito ma-prevent? Meron bang naging karanasan o meron bang saan nagmumula itong ganitong insight, Abigail? Kahit maikli lang para lang din malaman nating lahat kung saan nagmumula yung ganitong perspective or ganitong pagtingin posibleng magkaroon ng ganitong abuse from the side ng IP. Abigail, okay na?
Yeah. Hi, Miss BJ. Actually, walang specific scenario in mind. No, I'm just really curious about it kasi I've searched for that Supreme Court ruling, and I think hindi unanimous yung decision eh. May may mga separate opinion din. So curious lang ako parang about the thoughts of behind dun sa ruling, no. And lagi namang there are two sides of the coin. So and I believe depende kung paano natin gagamitin ng isang argument ay pwede nating i-direct talaga dun sa dun sa gusto nating ma-achieve na objective. So I'm just wondering kung meron ba tayong parang in mind na nakikita na eventually pwedeng risk pala na magamit ng ibang tao ito to justify what they've done to a certain area or kung ano yung action, no. Parang yun lang, parang medyo lang looking ahead dun sa scenario. Yun lang. Thank you.
Okay, maraming salamat. Abigail, gusto mo ba mag-comment doon, Timothy?
Yeah, yun nga po. Meron naman pong mechanisms for protecting natural resources that are in place. So may mga forest guards, etc., and other natural resource protection mechanisms. And actually it redounds to law enforcement din. Kasi at the same time Di naman natin pwedeng i-discount din that some indigenous peoples have taken on a more exploitative attitude. So meron din naman nun, although I think it's a minority than the majority. Pero yun, most indigenous peoples are open to collaborating with the DNR naman. And I found several instances wherein the indigenous peoples themselves held their members accountable at sila pa yung nag-recommend for imprisonment or for litigation ng members nila. Kasi yun, meron naman silang ganun sensitivity. Wala pa kami naiisip na mismong program to prevent overuse of the Supreme Court decision. So if may suggestions kayo, it will be very helpful para din ma-complement yung mga existing interventions ng aming organization. Thank you.
Okay, salamat. So maganda yung ganung punto, di ba? Na kahit na sinasabi natin na merong kumbaga giya na protektahan at kumbaga hindi mo talaga exemption yung IP with sa mga natural resource laws natin. Sinasabi rin natin na overall may pwede namang mekanismo na gamitin para naman din ma-ensure yung pagprotekta ng lugar o ng resources, no? At kasama dun sa puprotektahan na yun at magpuprotektahan, kasama na rin dun yung mga katutubo. So hindi lang, kumbaga, hindi siya blind na ito exempted to. So ayun nga, so at least meron ka pa rin area at opening na ma-counter pa rin yung abuse. Kumbaga, they're also subject to the same accountability mechanisms. So, yun yung pagpapaliwanag ni Timothy. Ayan, sige. So, punta naman ako kay Riza ng PNPI. Ayan, so comment lang ito. Basahin ko? O gusto ba ni Riza na sabihin ito? Okay. Basahin ko muna. Pero Riza, baka gusto mong i-expound ha. So, I agree that as mediators, we must acknowledge the systemic inequalities in place. Ayan. So, yung mga power imbalances and so forth. No? Para po sa akin, there should be no problem granting our IPs and ancestral domains intersecting with PAs kasi they serve as stewards of our natural resources. The IPs and PA mutually benefit each other in such a way that nature provides livelihood and IPs greatly help in nurturing the area. Worries of destructive, extractive activities ay dala na lang ng other intersectional, ang lalim nito, intersectional problems that can be addressed through empowerment. This is why capacity community development of our IPs make the most sense. Kay Miriam, ang ating magiging isa sa mga keynote speakers natin, Miriam Coronel Ferrer. No? So, congratulations on the successful intervention. You provided the needed assistance or support to the weaker disadvantaged party. The keynote speaker earlier mentioned new initiatives that are more directed at certain advocacies, thus crossing over to campaigns/advocacy more than strictly mediation. Ayan. So he noted that this disadvantaged them because they were seen as partisan by the other party. Your comment on this porous border between mediation and advocacy.
Yes po, maraming salamat po si Ma'am Miriam. It's an honor po to be one of the listeners to my presentation. Yes po, there is definitely a partiality. Nasa identity din po ng aming organization yung partiality to indigenous peoples. Pero at the end of the day din po, partiality is actually the greater, parang aligned siya dun sa greater goal, which is to conserve yung natural resources and to respect human rights, particularly of indigenous peoples. Kasi without defending yung defenders of nature, parang wala, we lose our front lines to our natural resources and environment. So tingin ko yung in order to sustain yung peace, particularly yung ecological peace, medyo porous nga po yung border ng mediation and advocacy kasi merong prevailing and hegemonic structure of capitalism and exploitation na namamayani. So there is a need to challenge yung inequality. Kasi kung mediation lang tayo, by its purest form, just allowing parties to negotiate without recognizing inequalities, we'll just be reinforcing yung inequality na present. Kita nyo nga po na sa shinare ko, ay without the intervention of capacity development in negotiating with the DNR directly, ay talagang lugi yung tribo, ikinukulong sila ng walang recourse. Yun po.
Miriam? Yeah. Ma'am. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Of course, yung cause, yung may partiality tayo to certain causes, and this is really a good cause, as somebody also commented in the chat box. But I think now, when you mentioned na you are now talking to the local government, etc., you're actually moving now towards more strictly mediation, no? Kasi nag-ano na kayo, sinusubukan nyo na mag-reconcile at saka mag-move forward under the new terms that have been created dun sa pagpanalo nyo dun sa case na ito. So, yun lang, siguro meron pa rin talagang difference. It's not being it's not being committed to certain causes when you do strictly mediation. You do have your causes, pero iba talaga yung strategies and approach pa din. But basically, I think you're moving there. More strictly speaking. Yun lang. Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Ayan. So, okay. So, si Timothy, so shinare niya yung forum on the Supreme Court decision. Ayan. Ayan. So, si Ray, ganun din. No? So, good partiality is crucial po talaga. Okay. Ito, may upcoming trek po kayo sa sa Ipo Watershed. Okay. Gusto bang sagutin?
Yes.
So, mukhang marami rin yung interest doon sa inyong mga sa pagpunta doon sa mga sites, ayan.
No po.
Ayan, so may
It's our new way of advocacy po ecotourism.
Oo, okay. Ayan, si Atty. Alan Bersena. So I agree with building the capacity of the IPs to become self-reliant and sustainable, and also creating the enabling conditions to allow this. Okay, would you like to expound on that, Atty. Alan?
Yeah, thank you, BJ. I agree with Timothy on the need to train the IPs. Of course, they have indigenous knowledge, indigenous practices, but it's also good to enhance them and to harmonize them with our environmental laws and regulations. Not to actually teach them. With these laws, I'm sure they have some principles that are already sustainable, and they have been doing this for the longest time. But it's really more of helping them not to be in conflict with the law, more compliant, more participative, collaborative, and also creating these conditions for them to actually participate in a meaningful way. So it will allow more growth and development on their part. So it's also a part of leveling the playing field. As Timothy mentioned, there's been a historical inequality, and what we're doing is to equalize the forces, and the opportunities. Alam to ni BJ, I'm sure BJ can still recite the Kalalang versus Williams definition of social justice. But we'll leave that for another session. But to keep it short, it's really allowing creating conditions for them to become more self-reliant also and sustainable, more sustainable. Thanks, BJ.
Maraming salamat. Mapaparecite pa ako sa inyo. Okay, pero okay, so yung ganung input din na maaaring habang nag-iisip tayo ng mga paraan kung paano ma-develop at mas lalo pang patibayin at palakasin yung mga kapasidad ng ating mga katutubo. So iba-ibang yung pananaw na siguro kahit alam natin na by nature inherently ay alam natin yung assumption na they are really stewards of the resources. Pero siguro nga yung pananaw ni Atty. Alan na maganda rin siguro isama natin doon sa capacity building yung environmental law capacity building din para in a way mas ma-reinforce pa kung ano na yung alam na nila traditionally. Okay? Ayan. So, ano pa bang iba? Yan, cool. May upcoming online hybrid trainings po ba? Ayan, may tanong. Nakakita lang po ako ng modules. Yan, kung may interest galing kay Ray na ideas na inyo pang mga trainings. Meron ba kayong upcoming online?
Sa ngayon po, wala pa pong open to public. Meron kami with the indigenous peoples ngayon, pero yun po, mas targeted po sa kanila yung programs.
Okay.
Pero noting din po dun sa input ni Attorney Alan, definitely po, in fact, dun sa training, we taught them about forestry laws and new protected areas laws, tapos even the Supreme Court decision and anti-terror law, tinuro na rin po namin. Kasi parang there is a need to enable them to do paralegal actions na rin on ground. Kasi usually, it takes time for things to reach us pa. So, we build their capacity so that at their level, yun nga po, resilient na sila. Hindi na masyadong dependent dun sa kanilang network such as us.
Alright, so maraming salamat, Timothy. Meron pa po ba tayong ibang katanungan o ibang sharing mula sa ating grupo? Okay, so regarding partiality, okay, dahil po sa hindi pagkakapantay-pantay, mayroong mas advantage at disadvantage minorities. Magiging mas patas tayo kung magiging partial tayo sa mga pinagkait ng sistema. A society is only as good as the dignity of the oppressed. Okay, so galing kay Risa. Siguro bago tayo maghiwa-hiwalay, mai-share ko lang at siguro sa kay ni Alan at ibang mga taga-Mednet din na nandito sa session. May ilang mga modules yung Mednet na kung saan, although of course mediation, yung sabi nga ni Ma'am Miriam kanina, may parang on advocacy and mediation. Although yung Mednet, sabi nga ni David Fairman, nabanggit na parang mediation activist, di ba? Kasi kahit na mediator, meron ka rin mga parang, may parang partiality ka to the process, partiality na ma-empower mo yung mga community. So kaya meron mga parang mga modules na ginagawa na para sa mga komunidad kung saan tinatakol yung issue ng power imbalance na kumbaga kadalasan sa maraming mga pagkakataon na nagkakaroon ng mga pag-uusap, ng mga negosasyon, ay talagang makikita mo na hindi pantay yung kapangyarihan, no? When you say power in different aspects, no? Hindi lang yung sa posisyon sa gobyerno o posisyon sa isang lugar, pero power in terms of resources, pwedeng knowledge, etc. So talagang intrinsic sa maraming mga negotiations. So siguro maganda rin mapag-aralan kung paano magagamit yon para medyo ma-reduce o bumaba o if not totally mawala yung mga yung power imbalances sa mga ganitong mga pag-uusap. Yon. So parang invitation yan sa mga trainings ng Mednet. Ayan. Okay, si Joel ng EDC, meron siyang comment. Siguro po ang LGU at and other agencies should focus on uplifting the lives of IPs. Programs that would shift the mindset of IPs from doing kaingin into conserving nature. Ayan. So medyo baka debatable pa ito. Diba? May gusto bang mag-react dito sa statement ni Joel? Timothy?
Yes po. Ginagawa naman na po ito actually. Yung DNR nga po as an act of apology nagbigay ng funds for nursery establishment. So ano na po yun? This is being conducted na.
Okay, salamat.
Good morning. Good morning po. Si Karik po ito.
Sabi ko na nga.
From the Urban Port.
Oo nga.
Oh, sorry.
Sabi ko nga, para si Karik ito pa iba pangalan.
Kasi dati nagtago ako sa campaign. dahil nasa government ako. Yeah, may ano lang po ako, nakakikita lang. Ay, may parang how, yung pong conflict mapping analysis ng nila po sa area ng mga kung saan kayo nag-intervention po. Ano po na ang isa siguro sa mga results noon po yung yung enabling governance doon sa mga lugar na yan ay nagresulta na disabling governance, nagresulta ito ng parang deprivation and marginalization ng mga IPs. So ang tingin ko po ang siguro isang mungkahi na sa empowerment program na ginagawa natin sa intervention, mahalaga na i-consider po yung continuity of advocacy para to provide enabling environment or enabling governance sa mga IPs. Kahit na yung mayor o yung hindi naman lahat siguro ng legislator or nakaupo diyan ay dinideprive talaga yung mga IPs. Then ikalawa siguro na mungkahi ko po yung participation na capacity building do sa participation nila in governance. Napakalaking role pala niyan sa kanila kasi sa empowerment sa kanila. And then po yung syempre pag alam nila yung kanilang mga rights, ina-assert nila sa governance, sa government, napakagandang intervention po 'yan. Yung isa sa challenging po yung resources for them, saka yung transformation din ng kanilang mindsets in engaging the governance. Isa siguro sa mga challenges sa ating pag-i-intervene sa kanila. Yung resources para matulungan sila kasi syempre gagawin nila isang bagay na profitable sa kanila na kasi natural resource nila yan. Kaya yung government dapat should also provide resources for them. Pero kung hindi kaya ng government dahil hindi sila enabler, so yun sana yung napakahalaga yung role nila ng ating resource person na mag-intervene talaga sa kanila in providing resources for them. So, yun lamang po isang 10 cents na mungkahi.
Maraming salamat, Karik.
Sorry po, my name is Rick Domingo po. Papalitan ko na nga lang.
Sabi ko na nga ba, kayo yan.
Opo.
Sige.
Thanks.
Ayan. Siguro bago ko ibasahin yung iba pang comments ni from Ma'am Miriam, si Robin Murillo, nakataas ang kanyang kamay. Robin, tawagin mo. Ano ba yun po ng Raven?
Yeah, please feel free po to call me Ray. Pasensya na ako for my problematic spelling. It's just Raven, it's like the bird. Ayun po, ang raming, that was really a rich sharing. Thank you so much po, Sir Timothy. Ang isa po talaga initiative na pumasok sa akin was like, how, at the end, how there's so many good things happening in Mindanao despite its challenges and with our IT communities, and yet we would rather feature so many problematic and out of context events, features without nanatag ako sa yung the need for developmental journalism and of course in critical thinking within communities and us as social media users with our little bubbles of influence. Ang isa ko po naisip like more of a question, reflective question or take on my end is that of course definitely we historically naman po talaga na-deprive ang IPs po of educational capacity building needs definitely. But I'm also thinking po about the lack of compassion and need for reflective thinking talaga for the non-IP communities. Because at the end, not to romanticize because there's no such thing as a perfect community, pero we just have so much to learn from them. Like even in terms of the law, it's like we use Western standards when in fact, the law should come from the grassroots. It has its own spirit. Supposedly, we should consult them, but we do not. And then like so we have these standards, and then because it doesn't come from them, we have to go for capacity building for them. How about us, the non-IPs, like the terms of like how could we do dialogue pa talaga? Kasi at the end, they just can't do it all alone, despite them being a powerful force. They would all like there are those na nakikita rin po natin na sadly within the IP communities, meron din yung kumakalas. Because sadly, they would also want the benefits of being the oppressor. So it's yung parang iniisip ko, like on our end, how are we to bridge the gap? Kasi it can't always be on their end. And then one way or the other, there will be those from them who think na the other side of like siding with MNCs, with contractors is like the better way to go, unless it's on our end rin na we find a more compassionate ground, more engaging ground from our side, the non-IP side. Those of us who've already lost touch, and then therefore hindi na natin alam kung anong IP tayo galing. So ayun lang po. Thank you.
Okay, maraming salamat. I have received an advice na kailangan tayong mag-wrap up in the next few minutes. Siguro parang gusto ko lang, kung tama yung pagkakaintindi ko sa iyo, Raven, ang parang sinasabi niya sa atin ay while we focus our efforts doon sa pag-increase ng capacity ng mga IP ng IP sector, siguro wag din natin kalimutan, tama ba Raven, no, na baka ang non-IPs din ay may kailangan ding gawing intervention, no? Tama ba? Raven, yun ang yung
yes po, like
point,
reflective thinking, that kind of thing. What's missing, I think.
Okay, so kumbaga baka ma-miss out din natin yung mga non-IPs. Although yun yung gusto sabihin ni Raven, yung reflective thinking on that one. Okay? Okay, gusto ko lang sabihin yung sinabi ni balikan yung kay Miriam, talaga pong may power imbalance pero may difference po ang campaign activities sa mediation type of activities, and different groups can play different roles. Tama. Ako, nag-agree, thumbs up si Timothy. Actually, Ma'am Miriam, ano yan nung binubuo yung MedNet decades ago, nung medyo bata-bata pa ako ng kaunti, naging debate din talaga yung magiging role ng MedNet. So may mga iba, I think some of us actually opted na more on negotiation coaching yung kanilang role because they could not take the role of a mediator. Parang ganyan. So kung meron kang isang sektor na gusto mong tulungan, pero gusto mo siyang tulungan sa pakipag-usap niya with other groups, then siguro yung ADR mode na kanilang palalakasin is more on the negotiation coaching part, no? Tapos yun nga, meron din iba na kailangan siguro bus community organizing yung kanilang focus. So ganoon din, no? So siguro baka importante din na madelineate alin doon yung role ng bawat isa sa atin doon sa ganung mga conflict situations. Ano ba tayo doon? Tayo ba ay mas magandang maging mas mediator, o tayo ba ay negotiation coach o community organizer, o sabi nga may development journalist din, no, sa communities and many. So maraming siguro mga roles na hopefully mas mapayamanin pa natin yung pag-uusap doon. But of course, in the process and at the end of all this process, maganda yung magiging outcome niya, no? Pero yung mga different role players can play those roles, and ang ending niya pareho, no? Yung peace in the community, natural resource, good governance of our natural resources. Ayan, okay ba yan? I think nasabi ko na ba lahat? Nabasa ko na ba? Kailangan na natin bumalik yata. Ayan, so ayan, about the kainin, galing kay Raven ulit. Ayan. Ayan, so agree po, Ma'am Miriam. We actually are counting on NCIP to be the mediator with the LGU, but you're finding difficulty on this. We're trying to explore to use the DNR to fill this role instead with the PAMBI, given the reformed relationship we have with the Matricoso. Ayan. Sir Tim, lasa siguro to. Ano po ba ang best way to connect? Sagutin nyo nila, ayan, meron na pala Gmail. Ayan, so I think Maraming salamat sa ating resource person, Timothy Salomon. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat na very active na nag-participate at nagtanong at nagbigay ng inyong mga insights para mas mapayaman natin yung issue at yung pag-uusap tungkol sa na-share na case ni Sir Timothy. Okay, at siguro sa plenary, mas lalo pa nating payayamanin. Maraming salamat at see you sa plenary po. Thank you.